Good morning. This is John from the Springs Mennonite Church, and I'm happy to be with you again today. Here we're getting towards the end of the week, and I decided to switch my background around a little bit since the sun's not quite so bright, and you get to look at a different view of where I usually sit. So I want to continue Zephaniah, and I want to look at the third chapter. Excuse me. So let's look at beginning with verse 14. Sing, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O Israel. Be glad and rejoice with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem, for the Lord will remove his hand of judgment. He will disperse the armies of your enemy. And the Lord himself, the King of Israel, will live among you. At last your troubles will be over, and you will never again fear disaster. Well, maybe you can identify with the latter part of these verses here about fearing disaster. A lot of people come to me at points in times in their life when things are really bad. Maybe they've gotten really bad medical news. Maybe they've got family members who just gone off the deep end. Maybe their marriage is in trouble and they don't know what to do. Or maybe they're expecting a new child and they are absolutely clueless as to what they need to do or prepare for. Disasters strike all the time. I mean, we have physical disasters, hurricanes, thunderstorms, hailstorms, straight line winds, earthquakes, but so do personal disasters. And I don't know, maybe you have weathered one of these, and maybe your life got better because of it. But for most people, when disasters come, well, they're just in big trouble. So let's look at this verse a little, or these verses a little more carefully and see. First off, the prophet Zephaniah says, sing, O daughters of Israel, and shout aloud. My guess is, if you have faced a disaster, singing is not what your first response is. Now, shouting aloud might be, but singing is not. And then it goes on to say, be glad and rejoice with all your heart. Now, this one I know doesn't come to mind. It ought to, if you're looking at it from God's perspective. But it's so hard to do that. We are human beings. We live in this world. This is the world we know. This is the world that gives us all the understanding that we have. And when we look at it from the viewpoint of this world, it looks awful. But yet the prophet says, rejoice. Well, rejoice at what? Now think about this. It's one thing to say rejoice. It's another thing to know what are you rejoicing for. Usually when disaster strikes, you can't think of anything that's good. Right now in our lives, we have two or three things going on. Not to us personally, but to our extended family. And to be totally honest with you, there are no answers. Now, I didn't say there are no good answers. There aren't even any bad answers. There are simply no answers to what can be done. The situations of these individuals that Faith and I look at are essentially hopeless. There is nothing that we can do to make it better. Now that's a frightening situation. And the prophet knows that. So he tells us what to rejoice about. For the Lord will remove his hand of judgment, meaning that penalties are not on the way, meaning that correction is not what's going to happen. And it says he will disperse the armies of your enemy. Well, who are the armies? Well, it's all those voices that you hear that prevent you from going to sleep. It's all those people who really do mean well, but they don't sound very meaningfully well. Well, it could be worse. That's a dumb thing to say to somebody who's struggling. I mean, of course it could be worse, but that's not what they want to hear. That's not helpful. I remember a lady whose husband died in an industrial accident, and she said people came up and said, "Well, God wanted him in heaven," and she said, "I know they meant well, but I wanted him here. I needed him here." So, what do we rejoice about? Here's the key: the Lord Himself, the King of Israel, will live among you, will live with you. At last, your troubles will be over, and you will never again fear disaster. You know something? I've come to learn in my life, it's usually not the disaster that's the problem. It's the fear of the disaster that's the problem. Many things can be made better. Of course, not all of them. But there's always something good that can come in the midst of tragedy. But our fear takes us beyond thinking of what good can happen and only sees the worst outcome. Now, that's because we're human beings. It's not because you got a problem. I mean, you might have a problem, but that's not the reason. It's not because you are incapable. No, it's because you're human. And our first stance, many, many times, is to fear. But yet God says here and many other places, you never have to fear again. As you walk with God, as God gets closer and closer to your life, you see more and more the presence of Him nearby. It says the Lord Himself will live. The more you realize you are not tackling this disaster all by yourself, God is there. We just have to take a moment and let Him speak to us. Now, I grant you, that's not easy. But the problem isn't easy either. If it were, you'd have figured it out by now. So, the next time something comes up to you that qualifies as a disaster, try not to fear. Instead of fearing, talk to God about it and see if He doesn't calm your heart and give you some wisdom. Will you think about it? I'll be back tomorrow and finish up this series on Zephaniah. In the meantime, if you have a need or a concern, let us know. We'll do whatever we can as fast as we can to help meet your need. Thanks so much for listening. Take care. I'll be back again.